Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking the plunge into a film that is so much more than a film. We're talking about the 1994 Disney animated musical, The Lion King.
It's one of those properties that's almost too big to analyze. Its impact is just immense, especially if you look back at that specific moment in time. When it came out in June '94, it wasn't just a hit.
Yeah.
It completely dominated. It became the highest grossing film of that entire year.
Which for an animated feature was it was almost unheard of at that point.
It really was a stunning achievement, and when you look at the global numbers, it's even crazier. Its original theatrical run ended with it as the second highest grossing film of all time.
Right. The only thing that beat it was Jurassic Park from the year before. And think about this. 30 years later, after countless CGI blockbusters, it still holds the title of the highest grossing, traditionally, hand-drawn animated film ever.
Yeah, that longevity is really the key. It points to something much deeper going on than just, a popular kids movie.
It absolutely does, and that's exactly why we're here. I mean, we all know the plot, right? It's part of our cultural DNA at this point. The story of young Simba, his father, Mufasa, murdered by his uncle Scar.
And his whole journey of exile and return, we've seen it, we know it.
Exactly. So our mission today is to go on a deep dive past all of that, past Pride Rock, and really uncover the history, the wild, unconventional production that almost fell apart.
The incredible casting choices, some of which were pure accidents.
And the technical risks they took that absolutely paid off. And, maybe most importantly, how this one movie launched a multi-billion-dollar legacy that is still shaping entertainment today. We're really looking at the blueprint for a modern classic. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. When you dig into the archives, the origin story of The Lion King is, well, it's messy. It's actually disputed.
It really is. There wasn't one clean aha moment. It was more of a concept that was kind of floating around Disney during what everyone now calls the Disney Renaissance.
And there were two main stories about where it came from, and they could not be more different.
Right. One account traces it back to an executive named Charlie Fink. He was the VP for Creative Affairs, and his pitch was legendarily simple and very corporate.
Bambi in Africa.
But with lions, it was a formula. Take something that worked, move it to a new setting. That was the pitch.
And the feedback he got is so telling about the mindset at the time. It wasn't about the characters or the plot. The executives were worried about the logistics of it all.
The internal logic, yeah. You're like, okay, but lions eat other animals. How do we make them the good guys?
So they had to invent a whole mythology, the circle of life, basically as a narrative justification for why the main characters could rule over the animals they also needed to eat.
An entire philosophical framework built just to manage the protagonist's diet. It's fascinating.
That's a commercial formulaic origin. But then you have this other story, this much more personal one.
Yeah, this one supposedly happened on a promotional flight to Europe. Jeffrey Katzenberg, a top executive at the time, was on the plane with Roy E. Disney, and they started talking about a story set in Africa.
And Katzenberg just latched onto it. He started adding these, really heavy themes. Coming of age, destiny, and, most critically, a child dealing with the death of a parent.
And he was very open about it. He connected it to his own life, his own struggles in his career and personal losses. He's famously quoted as saying the film was a little bit about myself.
That contrast right there tells you everything about the film's early DNA. Is it a corporate product, or is it this deeply personal story about loss?
And the early drafts really reflect that conflict. They didn't know what it was. The early titles were things like King of the Kalahari or King of the Jungle.
The plot was all over the place, too. In one version, it was a big war between the lions and the baboons, and Scar was leading the baboons.
Right, and Rafiki was a cheetah. It was a completely different story.
The original director they had, George Scribner, he wanted to go in a totally different direction. He envisioned something much more like a nature documentary.
He was focused on realism, on the natural aspects of the savanna. You can just imagine how that vision would clash with, well, what the movie became.
It clashed so hard that he left the project entirely. The breaking point was the decision from the executives to turn it into a full-blown musical.
And not just any musical. They wanted star power. They brought in Elton John and Tim Rice. That decision fundamentally changed the project's entire trajectory. It went from a nature study to this epic Broadway-style drama.
And that's when Rob Minkoff was brought on as a co-director in '92, basically to help steer it towards that musical structure.
But even with the music, the story still felt unfocused. It didn't have that core dramatic weight yet.
This is where it gets really interesting. After a big rewrite, the directors, Roger Allers and Minkoff, they pitched the new story structure. And Michael Eisner, the CEO at the time, made a suggestion.
He said they should model it on Shakespeare's King Lear. You know, an old king, betrayal, dividing a kingdom.
But then associate producer Maureen Donnelly piped up and said, actually, this sounds a lot more like Hamlet.
And when she said that, it was like a light bulb went off for everyone in the room. The murder of the king, the evil uncle taking the throne, the prince in exile who has to decide whether to take revenge.
It clicked. The directive from that moment on was basically lean into Hamlet. Make it as much like Hamlet as you can.
You've got it all there. Mufasa appearing in the clouds is the ghost of Hamlet's father. Scar is Claudius. Simba is the conflicted, procrastinating prince.
They even went beyond Shakespeare. They started consciously pulling from other classic stories like the biblical tales of Joseph, betrayed by his family, exiled, and then returns to save them.
And Moses, the child cast out who returns to liberate his people. They were intentionally layering these deep, universal archetypal stories on top of each other.
Which is pretty ambitious for a Disney cartoon. They were aiming for classical tragedy.
That new framework led to some really key story changes. First, the title. It went from King of the Jungle to the Lion King for the very simple reason that lions live on the savanna, not in the jungle.
A small but important detail.
But the big one was making Mufasa and Scar brothers. In the early drafts, they weren't related. Making them brothers made the whole betrayal so much more personal, so much more.
Well, Shakespearean. It's fratricide.
And what's wild is that all this investment in high art classical drama was happening on a project that Disney, internally, had almost no faith in.
Which brings us to the B-Team challenge.
The movie everyone thought was going to be a flop. The Lion King's production schedule was running at the same time as Pocahontas.
And inside Disney feature animation, Pocahontas was the project to be on. It was seen as the serious, prestigious, Oscar-bait film.
The great American epic. It had the A-list animators, the top talent. Everyone who was anyone wanted to work on Pocahontas.
Which left The Lion King with what became known as the B-Team. It was mostly younger animators, a lot of them in their first supervising roles. It was the underdog project. Producer Don Hahn had that perfect summary of the initial expectations. He described the premise as, I'm quoting here, a lion cub gets framed for murder by his uncle, set to the music of Elton John.
When you put it like that, it sounds insane. And the fact that this risky project, made by the so-called B-Team, went on to just crush Pocahontas at the box office is one of the great ironies of that era at Disney.
And the production itself was just plagued with problems. They were constantly rewriting the dialogue and the story, which meant they had to keep reanimating scenes that are already finished.
It was so bad they completely missed their original release date, which was supposed to be Thanksgiving of 1993.
And then, as if the pressure wasn't enough, just 6 months before their new summer 1994 release date, something completely out of their control happened.
The Northridge earthquake, January 1994, it literally shut down the entire studio.
So you have these animators on a crushing deadline for a movie that's already behind schedule, and now they have to finish it from home.
From makeshift studios in their garages and living rooms, for a film that was pushing the boundaries of blending hand-drawn art with brand new computer animation. I mean, the fact that it came out looking as good as it did is nothing short of a miracle. It's a real testament to that B-Team.
Let's talk about the voices, because the film's success really hinges on them. These aren't cartoony characters. They needed real dramatic weight. And the casting was full of interesting stories and near misses.
Well, you have to start with the king himself, Mufasa. James Earl Jones was pretty much the only choice. They needed that voice, that powerful, resonant, almost godlike quality.
They said it sounded like a lion's roar.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that Jones himself said the character changed over the long production. He felt Mufasa started out as this really formidable epic king.
And by the end,
he joked that Mufasa had become more and more of a dopey dad, which I think shows that the filmmakers were actively trying to make him more relatable, not just this intimidating figurehead.
Okay, so contrast that with the villain, Scar, which to me is one of the all-time great vocal performances, Jeremy Irons.
But he didn't want to do it. He initially refused the role.
Right. He had just won the Oscar for playing Klaus von Bülow in Reversal of Fortune. He was at the peak of his career as this serious, dramatic actor.
And he was hesitant about jumping into a Disney animated musical. He wasn't sure about the singing.
So what did the creative team do? They didn't just move on to the next actor. They actually rewrote the part for him.
They studied his performance in Reversal of Fortune and started incorporating that character's persona, that sarcastic, condescending, dark wit, directly into Scar. They even stole one of the character's lines from that movie and gave it to Scar just to entice him.
And it wasn't just the voice. The lead animator for Scar, Andreas Deja, became obsessed with Iron's performance.
He watched his films for hours, studying his facial expressions, his posture, his little tics and mannerisms, and he integrated all of those subtle human details directly into the animation of the lion.
So when you're watching Scar, you're not just hearing Jeremy Irons, you're sort of watching him too. The performance is baked into the drawing itself.
It's a masterclass in character synthesis. They built this animated villain on a foundation of really sophisticated adult psychological drama.
Okay, so from that high drama, let's go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Timon and Pumbaa.
Pure accidental magic. Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella are absolutely iconic now, but their casting was a total fluke.
Lane was originally there to audition for Zazu.
And Sabella was auditioning to be one of the hyenas, but they knew each other. They were co-starring on Broadway at the time in Guys and Dolls and had this amazing comedic chemistry.
So when they ran into each other at the audition, the directors just, on a whim, asked them to read for the hyenas together.
And it was instant. The energy was so perfect, the banter was so natural that the directors just stopped everything. They knew they couldn't split them up.
So they threw out the original plan and cast them on the spot as Timon and Pumbaa. The characters were basically crafted around their existing friendship and comedic timing.
A package deal, discovered completely by accident.
Speaking of the hyenas, that was a whole other thing. The original idea was to reunite the comedy duo Cheech and Chong.
But Tommy Chong wasn't available. They could only get Cheech Marin, who became Banzai. So that forced them to create a new character, the female leader, Shenzi.
And Whoopi Goldberg apparently called the studio and just insisted on being in the movie, so they gave her that part. And the third hyena, the laughing one, Ed, that was the legendary voice actor Jim Cummings.
And you can't forget Zazu, Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean himself.
Who also, reluctantly, took the part. He said he saw himself as a visual artist and didn't really see the point in doing voice-only work.
It's amazing how many of the key actors were hesitant, but he later called the final film very special, so I think he came around.
And then there's the nuance with young Simba. Most people know the speaking voice was Jonathan Taylor Thomas, JTT, who was a massive star at the time from Home Improvement.
He was the face of the marketing for young Simba, for sure, but he didn't do the singing.
No. The singing voice for songs like I Just Can't Wait to Be King was a young actor named Jason Weaver.
And this is a really important and often overlooked part of the story. It comes down to the contract negotiation.
Tell us about it.
Well, Disney's initial offer was a standard one-time flat fee. Couple $1 million. But Jason Weaver's mother was a really savvy negotiator.
She turned it down.
She turned down the multi-million-dollar flat fee. Instead, she negotiated a smaller upfront payment of $100,000 plus royalties from the soundtrack.
Which was an incredibly smart move.
A brilliant move. Because while Jonathan Taylor Thomas got all the marketing attention, Jason Weaver's voice was on the soundtrack that would go on to sell over 10 million copies in the U.S. alone. That royalty deal guaranteed him a financial stake in the film's massive ongoing musical success for decades to come.
Let's get into the production itself. I mean, for all the talk of CGI today, it's easy to forget what a technical and artistic achievement this film was. It is still the highest-grossing hand-drawn film for a reason.
And to get there, the animators had to basically learn a whole new skill set. You know, Disney animation up to that point was very anthropomorphic. Mickey Mouse wears shorts, Baloo walks on 2 feet.
Right, they were used to drawing characters that acted like humans.
Exactly. For The Lion King, they had to master the anatomy of 4-legged animals. They had to make them move realistically, which was a huge departure. They were aiming for epic, not cartoony.
So they did their homework. They brought in wildlife experts like Jim Fowler, and they spent hours and hours at the Miami Metro Zoo just sketching and studying how the animals moved.
They were trying to get the scale of a live-action epic, something like Lawrence of Arabia. They even used different camera techniques, different focal lengths to make the savanna feel vast and real, not flat like a nature documentary.
And the technology they used was key to achieving that ambition. Even though it's hand-drawn, it leaned heavily on a system called CAPS.
CAPS, the Computer Animation Production System. It was a game changer. It was developed by Disney and Pixar, and it essentially digitized the whole ink and paint process.
So instead of painting on physical cells, they could scan the drawings and color them on a computer.
Which allowed for way more complex coloring and lighting effects. But more importantly, it let them create these incredible sweeping camera movements that would have been impossible with the old multiplane cameras.
And there's no better example of that fusion of art and technology than the wildebeest stampede.
Oh, that sequence, that was the moonshot of the whole production. That single scene, it's only about 2.5 minutes long.
It took over 2 years to make.
2 years, with a dedicated team of 5 specialized animators and technicians.
So walk us through that. Why was it so unbelievably complex?
The challenge was creating a convincing herd. You couldn't just draw hundreds of wildebeests. It would look flat and repetitive. So they used a 3D computer program. They built a few distinct, detailed 3D models of a wildebeest. Then they used that program to multiply those models into a herd of hundreds. Each one was controlled by its own set of physics rules, so they would run down the gorge in a randomized, unpredictable way. It felt like a real panicked herd, not just a repeating animation.
But the trick was making those 3D models look like they belonged in a 2D hand-drawn movie.
That was the genius of it. It's a process called cell shading. They rendered the 3D models with flat colors and thick black outlines, so they blended seamlessly with the hand-drawn characters like Simba and Mufasa. It was a technical milestone that audiences had just never seen before.
And the technical brilliance was matched by the music. The team of Elton John and Tim Rice was just perfect.
Pure gold. They wrote 5 original songs, and 3 of them got nominated for an Oscar. Circle of Life, Hakuna Matata.
And the winner, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? But the score itself also won an Oscar, and that was all Hans Zimmer.
And this was Zimmer's first Oscar win. His involvement was actually really personal. He said he took the job partly because he wanted to make something his young daughter could watch. But he also drew on the grief he still felt from losing his own father when he was a child.
You can really hear that, can't you? That personal connection, especially the music during Mufasa's death scene. It has this profound emotional depth.
Absolutely. And then he did something crucial. He brought in the South African composer Lebo M to arrange and conduct traditional African choirs and add authentic musical elements to the score.
That's where the iconic opening chant from Circle of Life comes from.
It is. That one Zulu chant, sung by Lebo M himself, instantly defines the entire musical world of the film. It's probably one of the most recognizable opening notes in cinema history.
And the soundtrack just exploded commercially. It's the only soundtrack for an animated film to ever be certified diamond.
10 times platinum, over 10 million copies sold in the U.S. It wasn't just a successful soundtrack, it became a massive cultural and economic force all on its own.
But for all its success, the film wasn't without some significant controversy. And we have to talk about the biggest one, the one that still lingers today.
The Kimba the White Lion controversy.
Right. For those who don't know, Kimba was a Japanese anime from the 1960s, created by the legendary Osamu Tezuka. And the similarities to The Lion King are, well, they're striking.
They're undeniable. You have a young lion cub hero whose name sounds similar, Kimba, Simba, a wise monkey mentor, villainous hyenas, an evil uncle with a scar over his eye, even a scene where the ghost of the father appears in the clouds.
The similarities were so obvious that Matthew Broderick, the voice of adult Simba, said in an early interview that he thought he'd been hired to work on an American remake of Kimba.
In Japan, it was a huge deal. Nearly 500 Japanese cartoonists signed a petition protesting what they saw as blatant plagiarism by Disney.
And yet Disney has always vehemently denied it. The director, Roger Allers, claimed he'd never even heard of Kimba until The Lion King was almost finished.
Which is a bit hard to square, but it's their official position. In the end, Tezuka Productions, the studio behind Kimba, never sued.
Why not?
Their president at the time said that while there were similarities, the stories were totally different. But he also made a point of mentioning Disney's incredibly powerful legal team as a factor in their decision. So it remains this sort of unresolved cloud over the film's legacy.
And the critiques didn't stop there. There were also some pretty serious criticisms leveled at the film here in the U.S., especially around themes of race and class.
Yeah, a lot of critics pointed to the hyenas. They were voiced by Whoopi Goldberg, Cheech Marin, and Jim Cummings, and they were coded to speak in dialects often associated with urban, marginalized Black and Latino communities.
And these characters live in a desolate ghetto, the Elephant Graveyard, and are portrayed as lazy, greedy, and constantly plotting to overthrow the, refined, aristocratic lions.
Some critics took it even further, arguing that the film's whole philosophy, the circle of life, is actually a defense of a rigid monarchical caste system. The lions are on top because they're born to be, and the hyenas are villains simply because they want to disrupt that natural order.
It's a pretty deep critique of the film's core ideology.
And then you get the The slightly more niche complaints.
The hyena biologist.
The hyena biologists. A group of researchers publicly protested the film for its negative and inaccurate portrayal of hyenas, joking that it set back hyena conservation efforts by years.
And finally, you have to mention the dust cloud, the SX controversy.
No, that was a classic 90s moral panic. Activist groups claim that for a few frames when Simba flops down on the cliff, the dust cloud spells out the word SAX.
A subliminal message aimed at corrupting children.
Of course. One of the animators, Tom Cito, eventually had to come out and explain it. He said the effects team had just put in their initials SFX for special effects as a little inside joke. The movement of the dust just distorted the letters, but the controversy took on a life of its own.
So you've got this film that's born out of chaos, pushes technical boundaries, courts controversy, and yet its legacy is defined by just monumental, enduring success. It wasn't just a hit in theaters. It completely redefined the home video market.
It was the undisputed king of VHS. By 1997, it had sold over 55 million videotapes worldwide. That made it the best-selling home video title of all time, period. Just the VHS sales in the U.S. grossed over $500 million.
An unbelievable number. But what's maybe even more shocking is its staying power in theaters. Let's fast forward to 2011. Disney decides to do this experimental, limited 3D re-release.
And nobody thought it would do that well. Re-releases usually didn't make much of a splash.
But this one did. It opened at #1 at the box office. It beat brand new movies. It was the first reissue to hit #1 since Return of the Jedi did it back in 1997.
It ended up making almost $95 million domestically in that short run. It was such a surprise hit that Disney and Pixar immediately greenlit 3D re-releases for a bunch of their other classics.
Like Beauty and the Beast, Finding Nemo.
But here's the interesting thing. None of them came close to matching The Lion King's success. The novelty of the 3D re-release wore off really fast.
Which suggests it wasn't just about the 3D gimmick, right?
Okay.
There was something unique about The Lion King's cultural gravity that just pulled people back into theaters in a way other films couldn't replicate.
Exactly. And that cultural significance was made official in 2016 when the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. That's a huge honor.
But if you want to talk about the real engine of the legacy, the thing that keeps it culturally relevant and generating massive revenue 30 years later, you have to talk about the stage show.
The Broadway musical. It's the centerpiece. Premiering in 1997, directed by the absolute genius Julie Taymor, it completely redefined what a Broadway show could look like.
She didn't just put the movie on a stage. She reimagined it as this incredible piece of performance art, using puppetry and masks in a way nobody had seen before.
And she leaned heavily into the cultural authenticity. She brought in more African music and, crucially, incorporated several indigenous African languages, Swahili, Zulu, Xhosa, directly into the show's script and songs.
And the result? It won 6 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Today, it's one of the longest-running and highest-grossing shows in Broadway history. It's a global phenomenon that keeps the IP alive for brand new generations.
And that success just fueled the franchise machine. You had the animated spin-off series in the 90s, the direct-to-video sequels.
And now we're in the modern era of retellings, the 2019 photorealistic CGI remake.
Directed by Jon Favreau with this all-star cast, Donald Glover, Beyoncé, it was a massive, massive financial hit.
And they brought James Earl Jones back to voice Mufasa one more time, which was a lovely full-circle moment. That film became, for a time, the highest-grossing animated film ever made.
But maybe even more culturally important than the remake was what came out of it. Beyoncé's visual album, Black is King.
It was incredible. She took the themes of the movie and the music from her soundtrack album, The Gift, and reinterpreted them through the lens of modern Black identity and culture.
She described it as reimagining the story's lessons for young Black people in search of their own crowns. It was this profound, artistic statement that took the film's core ideas of royalty and legacy and made them immediate and powerful for a new audience.
And the franchise isn't slowing down. We've got the prequel coming out, Mufasa, The Lion King, directed by Barry Jenkins and Oscar winner. They are still finding new stories to tell in this universe.
It's not a dormant legacy. It's an active, expanding, constantly renewing cultural force.
So when you step back and look at this whole deep dive, the thing that really stands out is just the sheer unlikeliness of it all, this B-team project that nobody at Disney believed in.
Competing with the studio's prestige picture, surviving a literal earthquake mid-production, all for this high-risk concept of Hamlet with lions and Elton John songs.
And yet, that's the very thing that made it work. That combination of deep classical, universal themes, the Shakespeare, the biblical stories, with cutting-edge animation and incredible casting chemistry, it just propelled it into another stratosphere.
It found this perfect balance between being high art and high-stakes commercial entertainment.
And that's why it connected so broadly. It wasn't just a kids' movie. Critics at a time called it emotionally stirring and superbly drawn. It got an A-plus cinema score. It worked for everyone.
So here's the final thought to leave you with. We always talk about The Lion King as a classic Disney film, but maybe we should think about it differently. The way it integrated complex classical tragedy with pop music and groundbreaking technology. It basically created a new blueprint for a modern media franchise.
They knowingly took the skeleton of Hamlet and built a commercial high-tech empire on top of it. So the question for you to think about is this. In the 30 years since, how has that Shakespearean blueprint, that model of blending high culture with high production value, influenced the other major global franchises we see today? It's really a question of how classical tragedy, when you package it just right, can become one of the most profitable and enduring stories in the world.